You know, almost everyone in this parable is rich. And that would have made Jesus' first audience very suspicious. Even the stupid boy who squanders a fortune is, in the end, restored to his status as a rich man. Everyone is clothed in foppery and fine hats. The father and the prodigal drink and dance with rich friends. They eat a fatted calf. They wear ostentatious jewelry. They have slaves. All so very disturbing. At least to Jesus' first audience, it was disturbing. Why? Well, all the rich people in Jesus' audience knew rich people only if they had become rich by making deals with the Roman devils. They, skeletons in their closets, ghosts in their paths that explained their riches. So stories about nice, rich people strained the imagination of Jesus' first audience. It was actually like this. Life in ancient Palestine, as I've said before, was really, really ugly. Romans had this strategy of taxing Jewish people until they were so broke that they lost their land. And Romans used mercenaries to keep these landless peasants in line. What had been a nation of small landowners was turned into a nation of landless sharecroppers, servants, and slaves. Poverty in Jesus' day was nearly universal. Women were forced into prostitution and men into banditry just to survive. Judea seethed with civil unrest, and a very few Jews, collaborators, traitors, became rich. Jesus' first audience would have been suspicious of stories about nice, rich people. It would be like us telling a story today where the hero is Donald Trump or Todd Bertuzzi or Cruella de Vil. And what Jesus' audience especially can't stand about these rich people, besides their betrayal, is their privilege. Listening to the parable, Jesus' audience wants to know where the Father got his money anyway. How did he come by his fields, his fatted calves? Are his slaves fellow Jews? Did the rich man's servants lose their own land and dignity and are now in servitude? The Father, thought Jesus' audience, the Father must be a quisling or a foreigner rewarded by the Romans for some favor to the empire with a Galilean estate. Or perhaps the rich father was a Jewish person who had given up on Judaism, who had adopted Greek culture and even worse, Greek gods, and who for those reasons welcomed and cooperated with the Romans, saw them as a cultural upgrade from the backward religious leaders in the Sanhedrin. Well, and then there is the younger son, so privileged, he cannot even imagine a life where he has lost his fortune, even if he engages in riotous living. But he does. Such lack of self-knowledge on his part, such opportunity to do good squandered. His privilege has made him blind to the work, the trade-offs, the risks, the compromises, and the sly juggling it has taken his father to maintain that family's station and advantages. The young son is just plain stupid. And finally, there's the elder son. He's privileged too. Everything that his father owns is his. But never mind, he will not ever admit to himself that he was born with a golden spoon. He will not ever admit to himself that he's been on the dole to his dad for his whole life. The elder son works in the field so that he can say, you know, I earned it, though he has slaves who would do the work for free. The elder son says, I am a self-made man. I'm my own bigliest businessman. I didn't need a hand up from my father. I could do it myself. He is too insecure and narcissistic to admit his privileges. So now I wonder, What would Jesus' audience have made of us here and now? You know, our society's privilege is evident in how it, like the youngest son, squanders wealth on more and more consumer goods and entertainment and second and third homes and more cars without any thought to the longer term and generational or environmental consequences of using up so much of the earth. You know, it isn't that any of these things are wrong in themselves. All these goods are lovely, and we should celebrate our ability to have such things, at least in moderation. God doesn't want a bunch of killjoys at Lawrence Park Church on Sundays. But we should enjoy them while also giving thought to our permanent underclasses of homeless, addicted, mentally ill, and minorities. We should measure our consumption not only by the pleasure it gives us, but with regard to equal opportunity or to habitat loss or to social safety nets that really work for all of us. What is more, some of our privilege, like the rich fathers, is built on history that we don't like to remember and secrets we'd just as soon forget. Generations of slavery and war and discrimination have lifted some of us up and ground other people's, whole peoples down. I myself, I'm a child of the Dutch East India Company's transfer of immense wealth from Indonesia and China and Africa, especially wealth in slaves, to the Netherlands, building a middle class. Some of us are children of United Empire loyalists, or we are descendants of the family compact, who for 200 or more years used their grip on the reins of power and the opportunities that came with education and capital to boost their children and grandchildren, while others got no boost at all, not keeping treaties or refusing to make them in the first place, as in British Columbia, consigned our earliest First Nation allies to reservations where we could forget them, and their children to schools where we could try to reprogram them. Our privilege is also evident in how we, sometimes at least, like the eldest son, we defend ourselves, we justify ourselves. We insist that all we have is what we earned, that we pulled ourselves up by our own bootstraps, as if we were not born into it, that the playing table was not tilted in our favor. Many Canadians ignore the social advantages that they were born into, generational wealth passed on to children and grandchildren, families not traumatized by discrimination or mental illness or the hard scrabble just to tread water. Our privilege. Now, don't get me wrong. Privilege is not all bad. I actually give thanks for a lot of the privileges that I enjoy. I started off the service by saying it's a privilege for us to come together in this way, even during the time of COVID. We usually speak of privilege, in fact, as a good thing. As kids, we did our chores for the privilege of playtime or staying up late to watch a hockey game. When we're asked to give a speech before an auspicious audience, we rise and say it is a privilege to stand on the podium before you. When we eulogize a friend who has died, we say that it was a privilege to have known her. Privilege is not necessarily bad at all. Privilege can be very good and can be enjoyed. But privilege is complicated too. It's like the wind. When it blows, we do not know where it has come from or where it is going. Privilege can turn the vanes of wind turbine generators or wreak havoc during a hurricane. Privilege can come our way like a warm spring rain on a newly planted field. Or our privileges can freeze out others like a polar vortex. And what I'd like you to do today after the service is simply this. While you're at home, consider your privilege for a while today. where it comes from, what it's good for, and how others will see it. Because as with the good rich father in the parable, this father who saw his son dragging himself up the laneway while he was afar off and restored him, we too can look and see and restore and rebuild, forgive and be forgiven, and make new those who are afar off or out to lunch or discriminated against. We can do it, privileged or not. Like Jesus, we can choose. We can live for even more privilege, or we can live for the common good. Let's consider our privilege without being defensive or insecure, where it came from, what we will do with it, whether or not we will own it. Let's consider our privilege as the people in this short little documentary we're going to see now are forced to consider their privilege. Then afterwards, in preparation for communion, we'll listen to a virtual duet, One Bread, sung by Kimberly and Michelle. But watch the video.
Some people are born into families where they have to walk miles just to get water. All I have to do is turn on a faucet. That's privilege.
If you have ever tried to change your speech, if you were embarrassed about your clothes or house, if you would never think twice about calling the police when trouble is.
I think privilege is when some people have some things and other people don't have things.
I feel privilege is something that you don't even really have control over.
I think it'd be silly for me to say I don't have a fair amount of privilege, considering like the country I live in and the job I get to do and the college I was allowed to go to.
I suppose being a white male will help me end up somewhere towards the front, but I'll take a few steps back from being gay.
I don't think I'll make it to the front. I think I'll maybe be in the middle. That's just the gut feeling I have.
If your parents work nights and weekends to support your family, take one step back. If you can show affection for your romantic partner in public without fear of ridicule or violence, take one step forward. If you were embarrassed about your clothes or house while growing up, take one step back. If you have ever been diagnosed as having a physical or mental illness or disability, take one step back. If you have ever been bullied or made fun of based on something you can't change, take one step back. If you get time off for your religious holidays, take one step forward. If you came from a supportive family environment, if you can see a doctor whenever you feel the need, if you are able to move through the world without fear of sexual assault, if you took out loans for your education, if there were more than 50 books in your house growing up. So these are your final positions.
I think it felt kind of strange for everyone.
It's a hard thing to discuss or even reflect on.
It was very awkward. I think when you can represent it so visually like this and so immediately, it definitely takes on a new form.
I think we were like all joking around in the beginning. It was pretty lighthearted, and as soon as the questions started coming in, the mood shifted immediately, and we all it was just silent.
Just looking back and seeing like a bunch of people behind you is not a good feeling.
It's like weird how you want to like hold on to explaining a certain privilege, like, oh, but that's not actually me because like I had to work really hard for that. So it's weird to like take a step forward when you feel like you're taking a step forward with someone else, but you wear a lot of the baggage of like how those things were hard.
It was like more emotional than I thought it would be.
It reminded me of when they talk about slavery in high school and you feel like angry for a few days, but then you just realize like, this is how it is.
For me, it was kind of frustrating almost to look back and see how much further some people were behind me, and realizing that, you know, a lot of that stuff, no amount of hard work or even legislation can make up that gap.
It's interesting being an Asian American because you're not really sure where you fall on the spectrum of privilege.
I know that for me, one of the reasons I ended up so far back was that there are questions around safety as an African American, as a woman, as a gay woman. There are just so many different ways that I don't feel safe.
I feel like I just learned to be grateful for what you have. You know, we're in such a huge society where it's always complaining about what you don't have.
It just shows you that For some families, like each family, you're meant to do better. My grandparents did good, my parents did good, and I'll do even better.
I do think if you're not like aware of privilege, you should do this exercise, but it's more complicated.